Okay, I ask the guys I coach for ideas for videos because, as always, that's the part of this I struggle with. I don't mind making the videos, I just never know what to talk about. And Rex requested that I make a video talking about like the role of accessories, and specifically, he definitely has a specific belief on them that is also my belief. Um, and Justin also definitely wanted me to shit on people who don't do accessories. I'm not going to do that because I really do think there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, and for some people that is optimal. There are some people who make phenomenal progress without doing a significant amount of isolation work or variations. Although many of those people are coming in with a very large hypertrophy base that many of you probably don't possess, and or they have very elite genetics and are going to see significant hypertrophy adaptations just from regular powerlifting training, not optimized hypertrophy training, right? So that's kind of my caveat for why I don't think that's optimal for most people. You have the argument of why do variations of the main lift? It's not specific, and I would say this kind of breaks down into like I have tiers of motions, right? So you have the primary motions. The most important ones are those that you compete in or those that you prioritize, right? If you don't compete, that's totally fine. You can make overhead press a priority motion. That is a-okay. That's just the motion you want to increase your 1RM or 5RM on. That's the main motion, and then you're going to have secondary motions, right? Which I, look at it in two ways. You have two primary roles of the secondary motions. One of them is to emphasize a technical or strength aspect that is limiting your progress on the main motion. That is to say, if you have weak quads in your squat, your secondary motion might be a high bar to develop your quads, right? And you might have a breakdown of your knees shooting back because you don't have sufficient strength in your quads. This is a good way to address that, right? Aside from doing more squats the way you want to squat, doing an auxiliary motion that punishes you if you do it incorrectly is a very good way to reinforce those habits. If you're someone who underutilizes your back and handles down, SSB might come into play. If you're someone who good mornings everything, a front squat might be a very useful, both strengthening but also a teaching tool in how to squat with your legs more. So that's the first role, is to really hammer the thing that is leading to your breakdown. And the second role, if you're someone whose lift is pretty well rounded and there's no distinct technical breakdown, you're just failing the lift, right? And maybe you don't have one muscle group that's really underdeveloped. The way I've heard Sebastian Oreb talk about it that I really liked is then the role of that secondary motion is to address the primary mover that your technique tends to neglect, right? So I'll use a couple examples, right? He does a wide grip bench with a notable arch. His secondary motion is usually an overhead press because the shoulders are relatively underutilized in a large arch wide grip bench press. Much the same if you're someone who squats low bar with a wide stance. You're working your hips and you're working your posterior chain quite a bit, and your quads are maybe getting slightly underutilized. So your secondary motion might be a closer stance, high bar, or front squat. And I think that's also a very valuable way to address it. I would say that, I don't really have a preference between those two. It kind of varies by person to person what I would use. But that being said, I think they're both very legitimate ways of going about that. Then you kind of get into tertiary motions, right? And I would kind of have two general categories of those. One of those is, if you can handle a little bit of extra hypertrophy work on the primary movers, it's probably worthwhile if you can recover from it and you can adapt from it. It's below your maximum recovered volume and it's below your maximum adaptive volume. It's probably worthwhile for you to do, right? Because a bigger muscle, all things considered, has the potential to be a stronger muscle. So taking the time to isolate and hypertrophy your primary movers will probably pay good dividends in the long run, whether you're a weight class athlete or you just are trying to get stronger. Gaining lean body mass, helpful for getting stronger. Maximizing the amount of lean body mass you carry at a given weight, also good for your performance as a weight class athlete. So, when you can, a little bit of dedicated hypertrophy work goes a long way for the primary movers, especially if, after you finish benching, your chest might be smoked, but you can handle more tricep volume. You may as well do the tricep volume, in my opinion, right? So that would be one rule. And the other is motions that you feel are going to keep you more healthy. I know there's no studies to suggest that the whole training antagonistic muscles pulling to pushing ratio, it's not super important, but I find having a strong upper back keeps me feeling a little bit better. Right? So that's where you might put training antagonistic muscles. That's where you might put training stabilizing muscles, right? Both of those would go into this category. And then the other thing that Rex wanted me to touch on is that's also where you might get into varying the plane of motion. These motions are meant to keep you healthy. So, if we as powerlifters do all of our training in the sagittal plane, it might behoove us to vary the plane of training a little bit in those accessories, diversify our strength a little bit more, and that might increase our resilience to injury. If we do get out of position into a bad spot on our main lifts, if we have a little bit of strength in that transverse plane, like rotational, anti-rotational strength, that might prevent a back injury, right? So that's why it's something here Carlos Reyes talked a lot about is, the things that he feel really reduced his risk of injury are maintaining a high aerobic capacity, right, which I agree with. I think that increases your injury resilience greatly, but also varying the plane that you're training in, whether that just means going into some Cossack squats or some like sideways med ball throws, or just even some like a Palov press, right, for like anti-rotation. That's still in the transverse plane. And so I think that those are the biggest things that the three major categories that I would place accessories into, and knowing what you're doing and why would be kind of the major takeaway.